questions. And tonight we have a relatively easy question. The question is, does God exist? For some of us, that may be an easy yes, obviously he exists. And for some of us, the question is easily answered with no, there's no way God actually exists. And this evening, what I want to do is I want to dig a bit deeper into some good evidences to support the existence of God. And so as I do this, I understand that there's all kinds of different people in this room. Some of you are all of you are on intellectual levels that are different. Some of you may be intellectual giraffes. You're able to reach to the top of the tree and you're able to understand the majority of what I'm going to say tonight. So tonight, I'm not going to necessarily give you something new, but I may stretch you just a little bit. Others of you may be more like intellectual elephants. Elephants are really cool. They're really epic creatures, but they can't reach necessarily as high as a giraffe. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some new information, and you may not be able to understand as much as the others, but that's okay, because tonight I really want to expand our knowledge base as we understand why do we actually believe God exists. And so as I'm talking about God and his existence, I'm talking about an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all-powerful being. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 3 sub-questions. And the 3 sub-questions are why, what, and where. Why does it matter? What is the evidence? And where do we go from there? And so as I do this evening, we all kind of understand that even at the beginning of the Bible, when we read Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so we understand that in the Bible, God's existence is assumed. It is fundamental to Christianity. It is fundamental to what we believe. So if God doesn't exist, then there's no reason to be here tonight. There's no reason to do any of this or to worship or do any of the things that we do here. And so I remember struggling through this question, does God exist? And even further beyond that, I was asking, is Christianity true? And for me, I came to a point where I decided if Christianity weren't true, if God did not exist, I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want to devote my life to a lie. And so what I did is I made sure to take time to understand, is this really true, or is it some fairy tale that people make up to make themselves feel better? And so tonight, I want to challenge you to think a little further and ask yourself, is this true? And as I show you just a few evidences tonight, I want you to honestly examine your heart and think through these and follow where the truth leads you this evening. So that'll be our challenge as we think about God and his existence. So first, let's start with the why. Why does it matter? Well, fundamentally, if God does not exist, there is no morality, there is no meaning, and there is no hope. And what I mean by no morality is I don't mean that if you're an atheist or if you don't believe in God's existence, that you don't do good things, that you can't do moral things and do nice things. What I'm saying is that you have no grounding for your moral beliefs. And so, in thinking about this, a very prominent evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, he's a famous debater. He hates Christianity or religion. He said this when talking about the universe. He said, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, hear this, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Well, that's a joyful quote right there. I don't know about you, but as I think through this is not a universe that I want to live in. But even beyond that, I don't believe that this is a universe that we actually live in. Internally, each and every single one of us know that there is such thing as good and evil. We know there is a right or wrong. Whenever we are wronged, whenever someone does something against us, we know it's wrong when we tell them, hey, stop doing that. Whenever we see some atrocity, something in the news, like a school shooting, you and I, all of us, know that that is evil. Now the question is yes, we know this is evil, but for the atheist, for someone who doesn't believe in God's existence, how can they ground that belief? Can they say, well, because of our culture, based on our cultural understanding, that is wrong? Well, what if there's another culture where that's the right thing to do? There are cultures, there are tribes around the world where it is the right thing to do for them and how they view it to sacrifice people. There are cultures who believe all kinds of different things, so how can we impose our morality upon them? Or maybe you can say, hey, you know what, because I feel that this is the right thing or the wrong thing, that makes it right or wrong. Well, if someone feels differently, like they feel, oh, it's okay to murder people, then it must be right for them and wrong for you. So the problem is how can you have an objective standard where you measure people by without a God, without Him? Some people will say, and a prominent atheist, Sam Harris, will say, hey, you know, what about human flourishing? You know, through evolution, eventually we got to a point of human flourishing. But is that good? Is that the right thing? Is it evil? How do we even know? What about cabbages? What about cabbage flourishing? What about all these different reasons? So just as we're talking about all this, we understand that without God's existence, we have no objective understanding of morality, right or wrong. And without God's existence, if we went even further, we would see that there is no meaning. How many of you hate math class? All right. Oh, we got a lot of people. All right. You ask the question, what is the point of this? When am I even going to use this quadratic equation? Like, am I going to use this 10 years from now? I'm working in the factory, and they're like, do you know the quadratic equation? Or is this going to save the world? And we ask ourselves, what is the point of this? What is the meaning of this? And in the same thing, as we look at the universe, as we look at our existence, without God, we don't have an ultimate meaning. We're just a chaotic conglomerate of existence, and we're just the remnants of exploding stars, so we're just nothing but stardust. And stardust, some of you may be like, oh, that sounds romantic. But the thing is that it's much different than that. It's just over millennia and millennia from an exploded stars that eventually resulted in our existence. And the truth is, if you could find some temporary meaning in, let's say, winning a hockey game or doing some good, yeah, that may feel nice, but ultimately there is no real meaning to that without God. And to go even further, there isn't just no morality or no meaning without God, there is no hope without God. There is there was an atheist who passed away recent years, and he was Christopher Hitchens. He was this really fierce debater, and he would often talk about how our universe, our very existence, is headed towards a heat death, meaning that our galaxy is on a collision course with the Andromeda galaxy, and ultimately, we're just going to explode into what he would say, nothingness, a heat death. And that is the only hope that we have. So as we look at our existence, as we look at our ending, there's no reason to it. Many of us, when we watch a movie or when we read a book or read a comic, we long for a solution at the end. It starts with some tension, some twist, whether it be a bad guy or a love story. Will the Avengers defeat Thanos and save the day, or is the universe doomed? Will Sam fall in love with dear old Susie, or was it never meant to be? All these different stories, longing for hope that keeps you kind of hooked as you're reading the book, as you're reading the comic, or watching the movie. And so, in the same way, with our universe, without a hope, there's nothing to keep us longing or going. Now, at this point, I haven't offered any evidences, but what I'm trying to do is show that without God's existence, I'm trying to show the cosmic dilemma that both you and I are both in, if that's the case. And so, with that in mind, let's move from the why to the what. What is the evidence? And based on time, I only have 2 evidences that I have time to share. And the first one will be causality, and the second one will be design. So, when it comes to causality, it's the idea that every effect has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has some cause. As we look at the physical world around us, we know that this podium hasn't existed for all eternity. All right, that'd be crazy. We know that I haven't existed for all eternity. If I were to hold an apple in my hand, that apple is not self-existing. It cannot explain its own existence. We got to go back to the tree, and we go back even further, and so on, and so on, and so on. And if we expand that to not just an apple, not just a chair or a podium, but to the universe needs an explanation for its existence. Now, some people try to get around this by saying, hey, you know what? Maybe the universe is eternal. Maybe it is infinite. The problem with that is that there are many philosophical issues with that. One is the issue of what many would call the issue of infinite regression. This means that you can only go back to, if you say that the universe is eternal and infinite, then the problem is you can never get to today, because it would take an infinity amount of time to get to this moment, then this moment would actually never take place. Another way of understanding it is that when it comes to a domino, let's say you had domino X, all right, and I'm holding domino X, and I set it, and there is an infinite amount of dominoes in a chain to knock down domino X. If there are an infinite amount, it would take an infinite amount of time to knock down domino X, meaning that domino X would never actually get knocked down because it would take infinity to get to that point. So although infinity is an abstract concept in mathematics, when it comes to reality, we see that it can't possibly take place when it comes to our time, our way of existing. Now, even to go further, when it comes to contemporary cosmology, how scientists view the world, the majority of scientists now believe that the universe must have been caused. Now, they have different theorems supporting this, but one of the most recent theorems is the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. I put it down here if you wanted to just copy this and type it up and research it yourself. And in this, they're looking at our model of the universe, pretty much the Big Bang model, starting at one central point and expanding out. That's how they believe our universe began. And so based on the expanding universe model, it is impossible for the universe to be infinite. It has to be finite and have some sort of beginning. So as we think about this, as we think about a universe that is caused, that is finite, time-bound, space-filled, and material, this directs us to an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all-powerful being that causes this universe. And this is who you and I think to be God. Now, some of you, there are many questions that can arise, but one of the most common questions that people ask at this point is, who made God? Like, all right, so we have the universe, it has to have a cause, but who created God? Now, this question itself is actually, it's actually a question that doesn't make sense. It's like asking the question, what does the color green taste like? Because what this question does, it makes a category confusion. all right? What I mean by category confusion is the color green, the concept of a color is a distinct category from the concept of taste. And so when you confuse these categories, it doesn't make sense. It's like asking, how much does that musical note weigh? You have weight and you have music, you have sound. It doesn't necessarily equate when you have two distinct categories and you're confusing them. Is everyone following me, or some people following me? If you're following me, please raise your hand. All right, sweet. Okay, we got the majority of people here. So when we talk about who made God, we're asking, the problem with this category is you can only ask who made something of things that have actually been made. I can say, who made this shoe? Who made this podium? Who made this building? But when we ask God, who made God, God is by definition something that cannot be made. If God was made, he wouldn't be God, right? It doesn't make sense. So pretty much you're asking the question, who made the unmakeable creator of all things? Do you see where I'm headed? Who caused the uncausable being? And so this is kind of a definitional understanding of God. And based on our understanding of this universe being finite, time-bound, space-filled, material, we understand that there must be some sort of cause to this universe that is uncaused, timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and it has to be all-powerful. The reason is if we say, oh yeah, there has to be someone who created God, then who created that, who created God? And then we have the problem, again, as I explained before, of infinite regression, the domino effect. So for anything to actually exist, for our temporal, time-bound reality to exist, we need a God. And so that's the causal or causality argument to support the existence of God. The next is the design argument. I won't take as much time for this, but I'm going to focus on the cosmic extent. So when it comes to the initial conditions of the Big Bang itself and forming the universe that we exist in, the universe itself was fine-tuned to an incomprehensible extent with these constants that allow for the existence of not just the universe, but for life to exist, including us. And so it's the idea that with these constants, the universe its existence and our life is pretty much based on these really fine-tuned constants that are seemingly balanced on a razor's edge. That's how many people understand it illustratively. And so to give a few of these constants, these are called anthropic constants, and these are just measurable factors of the universe that we live in. Some examples would be the universal expansion rate. When I was talking about the expanding universe, a good way of understanding the universe that we live in, and many people compare it to a balloon. It expands. So the universe is constantly expanding as a balloon is expanding, and what's happening is galaxies are getting further and further and further away from one another as you blow up a balloon. And so what they say is that if the universe has expanded at a rate 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it actually did, the problem would be that it would collapse upon itself and then nothing would exist. But if it expanded too fast, then no galaxies would have formed. Another constant would be the atomic weak force and the gravitational force. If they were altered by 1 part in 10 to the 100th power, the universe would not be life permitting. That is pretty much, that's like 10 with 100 zeros behind it or after it. That's what it is. That's how precise this is. Something that is more closer to home is the idea of oxygen. On Earth, oxygen comprises 21% of our atmosphere. If that becomes too much, then what would happen is we would have fires spontaneously erupting around the Earth. it would be unlivable. But if it was too little, then the oxygen amount would not be enough for us to live on the earth. So these are just a few of the many constants, what they call anthropic constants, that are apparent in the universe that we have today. The universe that makes it so that we could live and even have this discussion tonight. And so when it comes to the idea of saying, okay, maybe that happened by chance, the problem with that is chance isn't a reason in itself, but also when it comes to the probability of all of this, it gets to a certain point that it is so improbable that it is considered mathematically impossible for all of this to take place. Now, there are other reasons that many would go. They will talk about multiverses. Maybe there are multiverses. And for some of us, it makes us think of things like Avengers or comic books or all kinds of things. The problem with that is that there's really no scientific evidence to support the idea of a multiverse. And if we did live in a multiverse, it is not something that we would actually, if we did, based on theories, there's no way that our universe looks even like a multiverse. Because in a multiverse system, we'd see things popping in and out of existence, and we would be in a much smaller universe than we are today. Our universe would only be the size of a galaxy, and it wouldn't be able to stretch beyond that based on models of what a multiverse would potentially look like. And so, based on just looking at the design arguments and the causality argument, there is strong evidence to support the existence of God. Now, the question is, at this point, as we go past the what, the question is, where do you and I go from there? So, if God exists, if this uncaused, all-powerful being exists, what we see is throughout history that he would be personally involved in our existence. Now, if he were personally involved in our existence, we'd have to look to some sort of figure. And as you and I think about a figure that has been not just talked about in Christianity, but every other belief system in the world has some opinion about this figure. And that is the figure Jesus of Nazareth. You see, Jesus, he existed 2,000 years ago. Well, he was born into human existence 2,000 years ago. And yet he has changed all of society. He has impacted the whole world. Now, the reason why I think it's good to talk about Jesus, besides the fact that I'm just a Christian, is that everyone has an opinion about him. And if everyone has an opinion about him, he is a wonderful starting point when talking about what would God do if God existed and wanted to be involved in our lives. And so we see this Jesus figure of Nazareth, born 2,000 years ago, claiming to represent the kingdom of God and even claiming to be God himself. And today, as we look into the past, the majority of scholars agree on these 4 widely accepted facts. Now, it's not everyone, but this is the majority of scholars as they look back. They agree that when looking at Jesus' life, someone who many believe to perform miracles, when he was crucified by Pontius Pilate, he was buried in a tomb. That's the first fact. He was buried in a tomb. The second fact is the tomb was empty and was discovered to be empty by his woman followers. The third fact is many claimed to see Jesus in multiple post-resurrection appearances throughout weeks of time. The fourth widely accepted fact is that his disciples, who were considered cowards, truly believed that Jesus rose from the dead and gave up their lives for that belief, even when they had every reason to, as scholars would look back on, to not profess that, especially since the Jewish belief system didn't believe in a resurrection, at least not a resurrection of a Messiah or even a Messiah dying. They believed maybe in a future resurrection, long into the future in eschatology, but nothing that had to do with the Messiah. So many people, as they look at these four facts, they would say, oh, you know what? Maybe it wasn't Jesus who was buried in a tomb. Maybe it was someone else. The problem with that is that Jesus was crucified by professional executioners. And not just the enemies of Jesus believed that they were executing Jesus. His own friends believed that he was being executed because they were fleeing for their lives. Some people would say, you know what? Maybe the empty tomb didn't take place. The problem with that is when they look at the Gospels that support the idea of women followers looking and discovering the empty tomb, the problem with that is that if Christianity, if they were making it up, the last two people that they would say found Jesus' empty tomb would be women. And the problem is because back then they didn't value women. And so those would be the last witnesses that they would point to when talking about an empty tomb. And so many scholars, because of that and several other reasons, they believe that it should be widely accepted that the tomb was empty. Some people would say, hey, you know what, maybe all these appearances, maybe there were hallucinations. The problem with that is you can explain one hallucination, but mass hallucinations is considered an impossibility. And not just in one place, it's multiple places over a period of time. And so on, they have all these questions, but they've been answered one by one throughout history. And so what's even interesting to me on a personal level, even thinking about this, is that the very same city in which Jesus was murdered and crucified, Jerusalem, is the same place where Christianity exploded from. For me, that is incredible. And so what we see is we see evidence that points to this Jesus rising from the dead, a Jesus who gives us meaning, who gives us moral basis and gives us hope, and explains how God could love a broken world that you and I live in. And a Jesus that points to Christianity as a whole. So now this doesn't mean that you and I can't doubt. It doesn't mean you and I can't struggle with the evidences, can't ask all kinds of questions. I encourage you to keep on asking questions, to say, what does this mean? Not just about God's existence, but about Jesus, about the evidence supporting Jesus' death and resurrection. But I encourage you, as you ask these questions, to not doubt away from God, but to doubt toward him, to look for resources that can help you in your doubts. Now, one of these resources we even have for free tonight. This is something that we bought a while back, but we haven't brought out. It's just been in our youth closet. But this is a book, More Than a Carpenter. And we have in the box over there on the chairs. This is by Josh McDowell and Sean McDowell. It's fairly new. It's kind of revamping a book that has already been written. I encourage you to grab one of these free books tonight, and it's really short. It's like 160-something pages. If you are struggling with questions, not just about God's existence, but maybe about Jesus himself, I encourage you to pick up one of these books. It is incredibly helpful. And so as we conclude tonight, as we think, because God exists, because Jesus rose from the dead, we can see that God intimately loves you. But the question is, do you know him personally tonight? And John Hick, he's this philosopher of religion. When looking at the believers within the Bible, he had this to say. He said, for them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experienced reality which gave significance to their lives. The thing is, and I mentioned this before, is that we simply like the idea of putting God into a box. easy to control. We can kick it around a little bit, and every once in a while we take it out because we want to feel better about ourselves. But the problem with that is God can't simply be confined to a box. If God truly does exist, God deserves everything from you and I. If you don't believe this, I encourage you to make tonight the night that you may come to know him. And if you can't make that decision tonight, I encourage you to think more about this, to ask questions. But if you want to make a decision, or if you want to just ask questions, I encourage you to even go further and talk to your mentor tonight. Talk to me. Talk to Greg. We would love to talk to you this evening about this. And if you do believe this, I encourage you to ask yourself the question, how am I doing? And the question, how central is Jesus to my life? If this God created everything, if this God didn't just create everything, but designed the universe in such a way that it would allow me to exist, you to exist, but at the same time, if this God gave himself up to you, stepped into time, into space, and into our reality here on earth, and died for us, and that is a God worth giving your life up for. That is a God worth living for. So my question for you is, because God does exist and has done this for you, how will you respond tonight? All right, let's pray. Lord God, thank you for just your guidance and your wisdom. Thank you for revealing yourself to us in so many ways, not just through your word as we look at Genesis 1:1, but through your creation. It is amazing to think of who you are, how incredible you are, and the fact that you care so much about us. We praise you and we ask your guidance tonight. God, if there are people in this room who want to make a decision to choose you, who have never done that before, I pray that you would give them the boldness to talk to me or one of the mentors tonight, to not push it on any further, but to make tonight the night. And Lord God, if for us who are believers, those who believe these things, I pray that you would strengthen our faith and give us confidence and boldness in knowing Christianity isn't a belief system where we just simply throw our minds into the trash, but something where you are the truth. You are the way, the truth, and the life, and we thank you for giving us life. May we not take that for granted, but live lives that are devoted to you. Thank you. In your name, amen.